All right, let's get the party started. Hi there, everyone, and welcome to what is essentially the second Innovageing Insights webinar. I'm Merlin Kong, Head of Innovageing, and I'll be your host today. If you're new to Innovageing, we are Australia's national innovation network for the age services industry, and we're open to all who are interested in innovation in the age services space. We are a Commonwealth funded and supported initiative, and we were kicked off by Leading Age Services Australia a couple of years ago, and we currently operate from LASER's Center for Workforce Development and Innovation. We can't do the good work that we do without our network partners, and I'd just like to take a few moments here to acknowledge our foundation partners, the Commonwealth Bank and KPMG Australia, our goal partners, Plus Communities, Content Labs, and Mirrors Australia. Today, we're really privileged to have Leonie Mulhern from LAMSM speaking to us today about robots in the age services industry, and also in the context of deployment of robots during the COVID-19 pandemic. She is an expert in residence, an Innovageing expert in residence for robotics and care, and she'll be joined today with a Q&A panel. Let me just take a few moments to introduce them also. So we've got Lee Martin from Tanunda Lutheran Home, Olaf Zalmstra from MyCare Queensland, Victoria, John Skur from Ozcare Queensland, and Suki from the CSIRO's Data 61. Before we move on, a few housekeeping details. The format for today, Leonie will be speaking for about 20 minutes, and then we'll transition over to a Q&A for the remainder of the time. If you're new to this webinar series, please note that this webinar is being recorded and you'll be on mute during this session. That said, I encourage you to ask questions and ask a lot of questions. And to facilitate that, please feel free to use the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom window. I promise to get through as many questions as possible, but if I can't get to your question today, and if you've got a burning question that's just asking for an answer, feel free to email events@laser.asn.au, and we'll try to answer those questions as quickly as we can. If you didn't get that email address, not to worry. Alexis, who's working with me today in delivering today's webinar, will send out a post-webinar email. It'll have that email address, and it'll also have the link to today's recorded session. All right, then. So someone here, I'm just looking at the webinar chat. Someone's already posted something. Please do an intro on robots, okay? That's an impromptu one. Let me see what I can do. Here we go. All is here to please. From Star Wars to C-3PO and R2-D2 to the evil robots in the Terminator series, and more recently to Ava and Kyoko in the movie Ex Machina, most of us are really familiar with robots through movies, television, and books. Now, in many cases, these robots are depicted to be very human-like. They interact like humans, they think like humans, they speak like humans, they even, for the most part, walk like humans in that they're bipedal as opposed to moving on wheels. But the real robots that we have around us are really very specifically designed for very discrete tasks. And as such, they don't really look like us at all. I mean, in this sense, we can look at robots in many different ways. But most robotic systems around us are primarily a set of motors, sensors, actuators, and computers. In this regard, for today's webinar, I'd like you to think about robots as automated devices that perform physical tasks in the real world for us. And with that, Leonie, I think I will pass on the baton to you to start your presentation. Thanks.
No worries. Thank you all so much. Thank you for your time and for logging in today. I'll just quickly get myself sorted to, there we go. So for this afternoon, I guess one of the things we want to do is give you a really good understanding of the automated transports that actually are some of the current robotics in aged care and in hospitals in the healthcare sector, and what menial tasks that they remove and how that reduces costs and also cross-contamination during outbreaks as well in the current environment, but also how the actual trolley transport and the sterilisation robots work. And of course, then our wonderful panel members today. So for our, I guess, when we start to think about what the outbreak impact, particularly COVID-19, it doesn't actually really change for our aged care facilities, as you're all aware and are feeling it right now. It doesn't matter whether it's COVID-19 or a gastro outbreak, the results are much the same around increased staff time it takes. There's concerns around the safety and wellbeing for staff. the costs associated with PPE, the chemicals and the process changes that come out of that. We've actually got, I'm just going to quickly minimize my apologies, that's it. Additional cleaning and agency staff, the staff and resident and family stress and the increased support that they require. And then ongoing regulations and changes. And of course, COVID-19 has given us some, on the back of the Royal Commission, as well as quality standards on top of it. It's been a very interesting couple of years for the industry, but also marketability, you know, keeping that, that trust that the community has in aged care at a level that we can continue to have those positive stories and maintain an amazing industry that we have. And obviously at the same time, keep an organisation of profitability, whether it be short or long-term profitability. We need to make sure that whatever we're doing with the processes we have and the time our staff have, that we're maintaining profitability at the same time. Just touching base very quickly on the research that was done last year on over 4,000 staff. And what I just want to touch base on this is we've obviously got a lot of staff who are exhausted, stressed, don't want to be working in the industry in the next 5 years. They don't have enough time to talk to residents. And I wonder if that October research was actually repeated right now after COVID, what the response would be, and how do we actually support the industry is incredibly vital with the aging workforce. So when we start to talk about automation and robotics and how can we actually do that, and today we'll talk about the menial tasks and how we actually get rid of those low value activities that are either repetitive, manual or menial. And that takes a lot of hours away from direct care related activities. There's also the high cross-contamination risk for the transferring of clean or dirty goods. So from one place to the next, the amount of touch points that there are and the amount of times that staff are actually leaving the wings. And obviously at the same time, we have to look at the care standards. We want more care, not less, and more face-to-face time care. So that's where automation and robotics can help us with this, especially in particular in these very stressful and increased pressure times, to give staff more time to care. So we started to look at the organisations in aged care, as well as from the hospital experience we had to look at, you know, and this is, I guess, for you guys looking into your facility, how do you actually spot the opportunities to actually save time? And this is just looking at automation, and you have to find something that actually does add value that the staff are doing, that you do more than once. But more importantly, ask your employees to find out what those activities actually are. They have incredible hands-on experience with tedious tasks and processes to understand how to be more efficient. They actually know what those items are and what requires the personal touch to be able to disseminate between those two lists of activities. So check if the process, especially obviously it has a lot of manual or menial tasks, is repeatable and repetitious and has no room for error. And automating then will save you those, if you save time on those activities, it will be able to allow the facility to resource and divert those resources to another area. So increasing that efficiency obviously is where your productivity and lower costs will come, and will prepare us for any outbreak, no matter what outbreak it might be in the future for some of us. So when we start to, obviously, how do robots actually support in this area? So we'll head down the track of a very 1-minute lesson on history around automation for, say, an Australian company like Lamson, where it's not a new activity. Outbreaks, as in aged care facilities, is not a new risk, and certainly the industry has had a great deal of experience in this. But from a long time ago, staff have been wasting time walking backwards and forwards with items. So by allowing the automation and technology through history to be able to save staff time, not only improves the safety of staff through, you know, the cash systems in the previous years and in pneumatic tubes in hospitals, but also robotics right into the current aged care model and aged care robots that we have, as well as the UVD robot as well. So allowing for sterilisation autonomously. So by looking at automation, it's been, I guess, 122 years or so. And I guess that's where, from an industry perspective, is where does automation help us continue through to the next few years? Interestingly, when I think about and I looked into, obviously from a COVID perspective, what have been the biggest focus in robotics, and ground and aerial robots are the biggest focus in all of the press releases, over 120 press releases that were examined. the ground and aerial robots played a notable role. And if you have a look in the clinical area, disinfecting point of care, as well as across all of these other ones, non-hospital care and aged care, delivery of items kept coming up time and time again. So looking at where robots are focused at the moment around the world, the biggest focus has been very significant on the ground and aerial robots, but particularly with delivery and disinfection as well. So that leads me obviously to what Lamson has focused on, and what I'd like to give you some insight into is the automated trolley transports have identified obviously that in the past couple of years in all the sites we've done site surveys on, that there's an average of 50 to 100 trips a day, which can be up to 400 to 800 touch points in one day in each facility. It's also around 3,000 to 11,500 kilometres per annum per site, and up to 5 to 20 hours of pushing trolleys. And costs a lot for the organisation to deliver items. And also automated sterilisation today, for us focusing on that to prevent outbreaks, decrease the severity of outbreaks, and then the ongoing saving costs for that impact on that organisation, but also for the health of their residents and families and staff. So what does automated trolley transports look like? For those of you who've seen the robots in action, either at a conference or in real life on the facility floor, this is just to give you a bit of a picture. It's to move supplies from one place to the next to allow staff to stay in their workplace area work. They move food, clean linen, waste, clothing, dirty linen, supplies, luggage, etc. in smaller trolleys that are actually really easy for staff to manage, but are allowing for smaller, more quieter trolleys to be used on the floor. And so that when in a facility, they have a number of trolleys, but they may only have 1, 2 or 3 robots moving those trolleys around the facility. How far do staff push trolleys? And this is where the robots take away that manual pushing. On average, Australian facilities, in the white paper that was completed last year by Lamson, it was 4,268 kilometres on average for every site, which is like pushing trolleys from Brisbane to Perth every year for the carers or for the kitchen and laundry staff. So looking at the number of kilometres saved, this is what the robots are taking away, just the trips backwards and forwards, let alone the time wasted with distractions along the way, which we know is significant, up to even double or 3 times the time it takes for the robot to get there and back. For some of the sites, and for those on the panel would recognise these numbers as well, is that there's a lot of sites that we've done site surveys. They do vary in size and shape and design. And with the estimated kilometres, say at Prince William Alexander, the first nursing home in the world to put these robots in, they actually were 21 kilometres a day the staff were going to be pushing trolleys. And for the amount of kilometres and the amount of hours, 11.4 hours a day, it was a very big feat for the staff to be maintaining the services. They have 2 robots now at Prince William. Ozcare Hervey Bay, they installed 3 robots in 2018, and they actually, without even being full, at maybe around 50–60% capacity, we're already doing 5,397 kilometres of the heavy pushing of trolleys, which is pretty much from Hervey Bay, where they actually are, the robots are, all the way to Perth, which is over 1,900 hours of pushing trolleys each year. So what this is showing you is actual real data of this facility actually pushing the robots, taking that from staff, so staff are able to do other activities, more care-based, and stay in the wing for greater safety. We've just done a site survey on a New South Wales facility, and they've got 11,500 kilometres each year, well above the national average of over 4,000. And this particular facility has a great risk for back injuries, and are looking at putting in 3 robots to take those trolleys each day. So how they work. So when we actually have a look at the actual, I'm just going to very quickly touch base on a couple of little snip videos for you. And I'm hoping you can see that okay. So when the actual robot is actually working around the facility, staff are able to continue with their job. So when they've requested the trolley to be picked up, they go ahead with the rest of their work. The robot actually picks the trolley up and actually heads through and goes through automatic doors, and actually navigates its way around the facility and picks up the trolleys and drops them off to different destinations. The facility itself uses music, messaging, and is able to autonomously move from one area to the other without any staff intervention. The robots are actually integrated with doors of the lift and calls the lift to the destination in which it needs to actually head, and can work in back of house as well as actually inside the facility where the residents and families are actually moving. And the autonomous part of the robot means that the safety lasers and guidance can maneuver around residents in a very calm and very peaceful way, in a slow but very, very consistent way. So staff can actually then continue with what they need to be doing each day, which is very exciting. The automatic charging is a part of when the robot is not working and doesn't have a job via the tablet, it actually will go back to the charger automatically. So I want to take you with obviously COVID, we couldn't do a virtual tour with you today, but what I'd like to do is actually quickly show you a couple of little snips actually at Prince William, and this is actually just giving you a bit of an insight to how the staff are actually using it, because there's an app that they use, and they're actually using the trolleys in the facility, you know, obviously just from the kitchen or the laundry, etc. But this is just to give you a bit of a picture of a, unfortunately not live and in the actual facility, but you can get a bit of an idea. So staff actually place the robot onto the actual trolley station, which is just dots on the floor where they know where to put the wheels, and the robot is programmed to come and pick it up. They go to the app and actually decide, it's a bit like Uber, they go to the app and decide exactly where that trolley needs to go and what that meal trolley needs to go to this particular wing, confirm where it's going, and actually head back into the kitchen. So staff are actually able to use that app very easily. Okay, so once the actual app has received that job, staff go back to their job, keep cooking, and the robot actually gets the message via Wi-Fi, comes off the charger, and actually heads towards the station where it will actually pick up the trolley. So the actual robot has actually sensed that the trolley is actually at the station it was told to go to, scans the front of the trolley, heads under the trolley, and actually picks up the trolley and actually heads to the destination. Along the way, it actually is sensing things like obstacles and so on. You'll find that the robot will actually head through automatic doors and corridors. This is heading down back of house at Prince William. And it's actually sending a message via Wi-Fi through to the door receiver and allows the doors to open and tells it to close behind it as well. When it actually gets through to the lift, that's obviously, and passing other robots, obviously they actually can detect each other and they talk to each other so that they can actually navigate around each other as well, which is very, very good. You can see in this particular picture, that's a one robot path, a single robot path. So the robots would need to wait for one robot to go through one section before it can actually enter. When it actually enters the lift, you'll see this is an 1100 lift. We recommend 1200 or 1300 to make the process smooth. Anything under 1000 millimeters at this stage, the robot can't get through. So we also recommend 1200 to 1300. The robot has just delivered the trolley upstairs, and actually the message to the staff through the iPad allows the staff to actually come and pick up their meal trolley. In resident areas, also the staff member is actually just receiving. You can see her receiving that trolley by tapping the iPad to say she has received it, and then staff downstairs can then send another trolley to that destination as well. In the resident areas, we find that the residents, there's different stations in resident areas. It could be linen or it could be clothing. In meals in this particular wing, the drop-off stations are located in different parts of the facility. There you go, dropping off just in time for a very excited dining room in that particular wing. Okay, another quick one I just wanted to quickly show you is a couple of a video of, it's actually a video of the robots actually working in Auxcare in Hervey Bay. I thought I might just share that with you, thanks to our internet. And for the, I'm just going to turn the volume down, guys. Very loud in my ears. So basically we've got a wonderful, this is just a picture of the robots at Auxcare Hervey Bay picking up their meal trolleys in the kitchen area and heading off to the wings, just to give you a bit of a picture. It's lovely to have on-site tools, but at the moment they're obviously not possible. So at least we've got some really lovely footage at both Prince William and Auscare. So dropping off can be in different areas such as, and Hervey Bay is a really good example of a very large spread out facility, and they have a lot of distances, hundreds of meters between stations. With the robots themselves, staff obviously have an incredible opportunity to be able to do other things while the robots are manoeuvring around residents and dropping and picking up throughout the day, 24 hours a day. To GoPro footage. This is actually some waste or dirty linen being transported, and using covers if they're private. There's lots of different options you can have for trolleys as well. Some wonderful residents there at Hervey Bay. Okay, so just jumping back quickly to the presentation, the staff have more time, and this is where it comes to outbreaks. It's really important. We have less time during outbreaks than we normally do, which is already stretched. There's the kitchen, obviously, and staff and the laundry as well that really need that extra time to be able to do what they need to do. The other thing is the less touch points. If you think of a facility where you're doing one trip with one trolley, it can be 7 to 10 times that you're actually touching points along the way, whether it be lift, handles, etc. So it can be on 1 year just in one site with the 18 to 25,000 trips of trolley trips a year. You can imagine it can be a significant number of touch points along the way, hundreds and hundreds of touch points. So the frequency also of removing waste and dirty linen can also be increased as well during outbreaks, and the system is very flexible to be able to do that as well. Meeting the standards, this presentation will be available to you, but this gives you an idea of automation with robots, how they actually help you with the quality improvements you need to meet the standards, which obviously has a lot to do with guidance and safety and workforce improvements as well, and innovation. The cross-contamination obviously is a big one with no longer touching rails, the safety for the residents and laser guidance. Improved stock control during outbreaks and ongoing is incredibly important, as well as staff staying in the kitchen to manage their laundry and tailored meals, etc. So daily returns of personal clothing, reducing noise, damage to decor being reduced, and less smell in corridors are also some of the benefits as well. I don't have time to go through a lot of functionality and design. This is something that we can go through in a lot greater detail, but we do have a system that does obviously, there's different speed and different battery lives and things like that, but it is compatible with lifts and doors, usually is moving less in slower speed than it would be for a human walking, to give that nice calm movement, and self-navigating as well. The app is incredibly simple. The stations and the routes are planned together with our facilities to get the best out of the robots and to make it more efficient, as well as there's different future architectural design recommendations you will need to have a look at for building for new sites as well as for old, and we can provide those for you. Looking at automatic waste is another area that the robots, our first site to use an automatic tipper will be early next year, and that site is in Perth, and for them they won't have to touch waste from the pan room right down to, as soon as it leaves their pan room, the robot takes it to the tipper as well. So the automated sterilisation side of it, I'll just touch base on that for those of you who are wanting to think about sterilisation and actually the cleaning process, especially when you're either through an outbreak or a threat of an outbreak. So the UV sterilisation robot is a good example of a robot with UV sterilisation lamps on it. So it actually is able to clean either before or during before or after the cleaning process, so that staff can either use it if it's a known COVID case, or it could actually be used as a preventative throughout the facility in public areas, corridors, or in specific rooms. So that's killing the robot actually coming autonomously into a room without anybody in the room, allows staff to go ahead and do other things, and kills 99.9% of those bacteria and viruses. So this is allowing facilities in hospitals and aged care to reduce the high use of chemicals and the human intervention required, and getting a really consistent cleaning and sterilisation process. And they're incredibly easy to install, these robots. I'll just give you a very, very quick visual of the how it works, just for those of you who have not seen a UV robot before. I'll just give you a little one here. The robot itself is actually here moving around a room in a hospital room, so that you can actually see it's going a little bit faster, just slightly faster than it would. But by actually being able to move around a room with the UV lights, obviously destroying, that has certain positions in the room that ensures that there's no shadows, that staff actually don't have to be worried about behind things or close to. The robot can get very close to the object and sterilize it very easily. So this can be done in set rooms, in particular rooms that you've had mapped and programmed, or you can do it in ad hoc situations as well and be able to drive it around the room from outside that particular room and area. Okay. So why automate the sterilisation? There are static UV options that are out there, but they don't get behind and they can't get close enough if they're just sitting in a room. So this allows the room to get past all those shadows. The staff can go and clean other areas, and it saves a lot of cleaning each day, trying to sterilise surfaces with lots of chemicals. There's lots of benefits there you can see, reducing costs, decreasing infections in hospitals. The rate of infections, hospital rates of infection is quite dramatic in a lot of hospitals using these, so that can be used to prevent it in facilities. And that's a huge cost to an organisation, with outbreaks being hundreds of thousands of dollars off the bottom line with a simple small outbreak over a 2 to 3 month period. So this is a 10-year asset that can be used across your facility, or multiple sites can be transported between sites. And of course, that's a really important part about keeping our staff with reassurance and our residents, but also marketing and keeping that facility, particularly those who've been affected by outbreaks, looking at marketing and really bringing back the confidence in your facility as well. And I know, some of the residents obviously get a big kick out of it, but what I wanted to do is to really, everyone who's actually online today, is to think about all the menial tasks in your facility that you do have. How can you automate them? And look at how many hours you can free up for more resident care. How many staff are at risk of injury through pushing trolleys or cross-contamination? Where are those cross-contamination touch points around the facility, so that you can actually really identify the impact of an outbreak and how it can actually protect your service delivery. And look at your current sites, but also look at future-proofing new sites for automation. And that's something obviously that we obviously look at quite a lot, and every single week around Australia, different sites, looking at their current sites, etc. But it's really important to build automation solutions from the ground up. And I'm sure that, as we start to talk to the panel now, that we've actually got an amazing opportunity to ask the people really doing it out there, those that are actually looking at putting in robots, as well as those in the expert area of robotics.
Wonderful. So are you done with your presentation? Yep.
Thank you,
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for that, Leonie. That was really good. Now, we'll go into the Q&A, but I'll stick with you for the time being, all right? In your presentation, there were two things that came up that I saw on your slides that caught my attention. One was sort of the history of LAMSM. And I thought it was really interesting in that it started out with pneumatic tubes, and now you're in robotics. And I think that's a really interesting narrative with regards to how a business or a company has evolved in being in the business of moving things from one place to the other. So I just wanted to note that, because I thought that was really quite smart. I guess the other thing too, and it might seem like a diversion or a digression, but I noticed Rosie, the robotic maid from the Jetsons, in there. And it ties in really nicely with two questions that some of our attendees have asked. And one is, from your experience with deploying robots in aged care facilities, how have the robots been received with residents and also with staff? And what are some best practices in integrating robots at that human level?
Yeah, I mean, Rosie the robot from Jetsons is a really good example. And for those sites that have actually named their robots, that's a really important part of just giving, residents the feeling of that they've actually got I guess, automation that's actually not humanized, but actually have a bit of fun and having that connection with them. So that side of it is a connection, but the actual technology behind the robots is actually really intriguing to residents. We find that they ask a lot of questions about the robots. They get excited when they actually come through the door. Some of them are very emotional about their response when they see them every day, where they love them and they talk to them as if they're actually just, to give them that company. But others are actually quite financial about their responses, such as, I did my degree at, University of Queensland was one of them. I did my financial degree, and it's good that they're spending money on something that's helping the staff do a good job. And so there's a lot of different responses in dementia areas, which we do get that question a little bit as well. The GoPro footage we had in a dementia unit actually showed the residents not responding much different to what they would normally do to a trolley. They did respond very similar. So there wasn't any fear of residents in dementia areas being affected by automation. When we looked at staff and how they respond, staff respond to technology in all different ways, as we know. The first initial thought is, oh, I'm going to lose my job. But once they start to use it in that first week, one, that they can see it's simple, but as far as to use, but they also see that it's actually allowing them to do what they actually like doing, which is actually spending time with residents in the wing, or if they're in the kitchen, spend more time creating the most, really important meals or creative, and then obviously better laundry services. So they're starting to see, and the sites using them, and the panel can contest to this, is that the sites using them, when they don't work for some reason, if there is a hiccup, they're actually on that call helpline, and we hear about it because they need those robots as an essential service to maintain the level of care that they've got and safety in the wings and things like that. So yeah, it's a really lovely response we get from all different angles.
Okay, all right. Thanks for that. Now we've got a really interesting panel today, and thanks for sort of bringing everyone together with that, because we've got John, who's been working with robots for the last 2 years and have expanded it to 3 facilities. We've got Olaf, who at MyCare was an early adopter of robots and spearheaded Lamsom's first in the world installation. We've got Lee, who's at that precipice right now, who's making that sort of business planning decision to install robots, and we've got Sue, who is a roboticist and pretty much is if there was anyone that's living in the future present with robots, I guess it's you, Sue. So let me just go down that panel and just ask each one a question here. I mean, and John, could I start with you first?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So look, 2 years of experience with robots at a facility, expanded to 3 sites. I guess, from an IT perspective, what are some key things that you can recommend with regards to installing robots? And what are some lessons learned, the good, the bad, the ugly?
Yep. Okay. So look, I'll talk to. So my role's been head of IT and innovation within Ozcare. So when the robots come into our organisation, I was heavily involved, not only from a technology perspective but also about how do we integrate these operationally on a day-to-day basis. So some of the stuff I'll talk about will be across both, not only the technology, but also from an operational perspective. And look, some of the key learnings for us is fundamentally you have to get the implementation approach correct. And that is the early planning, which Lamson will take you through. And like the implementation of any technology solution, the first time you do it, it's a very big learning curve. It takes a bit of time to get a handle on how these new solutions work. But what we've learned over the 2 years is it looks complex from the outside, but a lot of components of the technology solution you already have in your operations now. So fundamentally is getting the implementation approach right operationally, understanding things like defining your pass through your facilities, understanding the timings of your runs. You have to do the analysis around, it's a bit of science and analysis behind determining, okay, how many robots will you put into a facility? How many trolleys do you need to support that facility? And the pictures that Leonie showed previously of the Ozcare Harvey Bay facility, you're talking about they're quite large footprints. So that facility is contains, we've got 54 residents at that facility. Mm-hmm. It's three levels high, as you could see, and it's got a 15,000 square metre footprint. So it's quite a large facility. Now, in the stats that Leonie was showing there, the return that we've got out of it, in the very first year, the robots travelled 5,300 kilometres, and there was approximately, or just over, 27,000 trolley movements within that first year. So there's a lot of work to plan and refine and get that right. You have to do that implementation analysis up front. If you don't get that right, you'll have problems down the track.
Okay.
From a technical perspective, look, I'll just quickly go through. There's on-site, you've got 3 core servers. You've got a mobility server that controls real-time movements of the AMRs. Mm-hmm. You've got a TechMedic server, which is driving the actual route programming for how the AMRs actually function. And you've got a lift integration server. So as I think people would have seen in that video, that when you're in multi-level facilities, obviously as the AMRs are doing their deliveries, you don't want any interactions manually. So the lifts have an interface with the AMRs, and the AMR will call the lift and reserves the lift, locks the doors open, moves into it, moves up to whatever the appropriate floor is, etc. So there's some work around that, but fundamentally the other core piece of all of this is obviously Wi-Fi. If you're going down the path of implementing the Lamson solution, fundamentally you have to have enterprise-grade Wi-Fi. Now in facilities for like ours, for instance, 15,000 square metres, throughout those facilities, we have approximately anywhere between 90 to 100 wireless access points throughout that facility. And you have to do an exercise you have to do what we call heat mapping. So you have to map out the Wi-Fi throughout the whole facility, because how the solution works is as the AMRs move throughout your facility, they're transitioning or traversing across different wireless access points. So the handle from one wireless access point to the next needs to be seamless to keep the solution running. Now if you've got enterprise-grade Wi-Fi in your facilities, it runs very smoothly. What we've learnt along the way is you just simply have to tune your Wi-Fi to suit the solution. It's like, and that's a principle that doesn't only apply to just the Lamson solution. Our nurse call system within our facilities, we run SpectraLink handsets or digital phones, and it's a similar thing. A nurse walking around with a SpectraLink handset that traverses the Wi-Fi, similar thing. You have to tune your Wi-Fi to suit those devices. Then Leonie also talked about auto doors and remote controls of doors for the solutions to open doors as they traverse through different wings, etc. We also have integration into our security system to unlock doors as part of this solution. Additionally, you also have integration. You need to have integration into fire panels and fire alarms within the facilities. For in the event if fire alarms are triggered, you have to cease the robot operations and get them out of the way so that they don't block paths, etc. And then finally, another piece which we're looking at right now is we're working with Lamson closely to look at if there is any event that occurs within the Lamson solution whereby the AMRs stop for some reason or something happens or somebody interrupts the operation, we divert the alerts or the alarms from that up through our nurse call system and into our digital handsets, so that the moment something occurs with that AMR operation, we know within seconds that there's something has occurred. And look, the final piece I would just also reiterate with what Leonie has raised is that the staff and the residents of these facilities have taken to this very, very well. We've got 2 fully operational facilities right now, and we're doing the implementation of our 3rd facility right at this point in time. Our 3rd facility is about to go live. And we've found across the board, as Leonie alluded to, initially there's a bit of intrepidation from your staff, but within a very short period of time, they see the advantages or the returns to this solution, and they very quickly get on board. One of the key learnings, though, is you really need to have a champion of the solution at each of the facilities. And in our case, it's been our facility managers. Because we bring them early into the journey of this, they see the strong business case for the use of these AMRs in this solution. So having that champion locally has really improved or sped up the process of acceptance. And now, yes, we hear it loud and clear when the solution's not working at these facilities. Okay. And the residents, I've interviewed a number of residents around the acceptance, their thoughts around the AMRs, and the common thing you get is that people are amazed by the use of the technology, and they think it's a fantastic thing, and they can see the advantages to returning the time in your staffing levels for face-to-face care as opposed to pushing trolleys.
Okay.
So certainly it's been a significant improvement that we've seen within our operations. That's
excellent. Thanks for that, John. And that sort of leads me to the next question. And I think, Olaf, this would be a really interesting one to ask you, because you've sort of worked in, you've helped been in that planning process and that development process. And when I think about robots and thinking about sort of designing for robots within the building, considerations like path planning would come in mind, and whatever have you. So what are some of your recommendations with regards to organizing planning for new builds and whatever have you? That's a bit of an opaque question. Sorry, I apologize.
Okay. No, that's okay, because it is actually a very different process to organise or retrofit robots as it is to a new build. The process is totally different. With a new build, you get the opportunity to, if you like, design a lot of things that you think, gee, we should have done that. Gee, we should have done that. And and in our case, we've had the experience of operating these for, what is it now, 4 years, Leonie, I think. And we've learnt a lot in that time. Things that people don't you don't consider when you're using a retrofitted building, but things you start to think about when you're designing a new building. And John's already hit on a few of those things. Your wireless access points, for instance, a vital part of the operation. And I have to say, in our new build here at Carrum Downs in Victoria, wireless access is important not only for the robots, but for a lot of other integration. The SpectraLink system, for instance, with our nurse call. There's a whole heap of things that run off our wireless network now. And if it goes down, disaster. But making sure you've got that right cover. You've got an opportunity to look at your paths of travel for the robot as opposed to where, unaccustomed visitors might travel and things like that. The residents tend to learn very quickly where the robots are and what to do to get around them and so on. But when you've got a building where you've got visitors coming in and different visitors, you need to start to think about, your paths of travel to ensure that you're covering off potential accidents, if you like. And I'm going to say these days, having service cores in the building is something that we're all heading towards, simply to ensure that we're able to, if you like, segregate some of the processes. Trolley space is another thing. When you've got robots, and here at Carrum Downs, we'll start with 2. We might end up with 3 to cover off a few other things like the UV sterilisation and so on. But with 2 and 120 residents, you've got a lot of trolleys that you need to ensure that you've got space for them to be located when they're not in use. And the ability to be able to, for example, in the laundry, where you can end up overnight with, 20 or 30 trolleys sitting in the laundry, and you've got to be able to get around them when you arrive to do the laundry work and so on. I'm working with a company at the moment to try and automate the keeping warm and cool of our food trolleys. So we take away the personal or the staff requirement to come and unplug them so that the robots can do it. Here in Carrum Downs, we operate a cooked shell service. Our kitchen is remotely located. The food is delivered on the trolleys, ready for the robots. But between the driver dropping them off and them going to the households, we've got to keep them cool or warm or whatever the case may be. And we're looking at how we can automate that without human intervention. So there's new things that we can introduce into a new building. Access. Look, this is where lamps have been very, very helpful. The architects design the building, we play around with all the drawings, and we look at it, say, yeah, that'll all work. And then along come Lamson and look at the drawings and say, hey, hang on, you've got no wall here. How is the robot going to park his trolleys there? And you think, oh, we missed that bit. And it's that extra set of eyes that allows you to work through that process of doing the, if you like, the final tweaks of the building. We do like to make sure that the robots are still travelling through areas where there are residents, because the residents do like to sort of not necessarily talk to them, but have something to talk about. And some of the comments that come through the resident discussions are actually quite interesting. I'm very intrigued in the UV sterilisation thing, because we're looking at various options that we can now introduce. But COVID-19 has certainly brought in or opened our eyes as to what we should and could do for facilities and robotics into the future. I don't think that we're now stopping at just plain trolley moving robots. I think we're going to start to look at a lot more to do. So yeah, that's where we're at. I'll leave it at that unless someone's got specific questions that they can ask later on. Back to you, Melvin.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Olaf. Really appreciate it. That's really insightful. Lee, let's move on to you right now. So you're at that point where where Tananda's looking at wanting to invest in robots and going down that path. What's the thinking process? What benefits do you see going down that path? And what are some key decision considerations that the board has to make in order to sort of get this idea and get this project across the line?
Try again. Tanunda Lutheran Homes are a rural facility, so we're located about an hour and a bit out of Adelaide. So one of our major issues is, number one, finding the right staff members to do sort of tasks and so forth. So it's not always easy to find the hotel services staff at an age bracket that don't injure themselves too easy. So one of our major points is trying to reduce our work health and safety expenses. We currently employ 190 staff, and our average staff members around 50 to 54 years old. So pushing and pulling trolleys is a big thing. And it was really interesting when Leonie did our sort of statistics of the facility to show just how far we were moving trolleys around. And I think if you remember rightly, Leonie, we travelled from Adelaide to Melbourne to Sydney, Brisbane up to Darwin, up to Townsville, across to Darwin, and then to Broome each year. So that's a reasonable amount. And we could save almost 2.5 FTE per day on just moving around trolleys. Look, the fact that with COVID, as Olaf has just suggested, has really made us start thinking other ways. Just in talking to my lifestyle staff over the last couple of days, we've lost about 300 hours already this month in volunteers. And so it really comes down to how are we going to replace those volunteer hours, and I do have a wonderful way of doing that down the track. Truly, it's about the fact that Tanunda Lutheran Home's very much into technology. We are currently designing a new 65-bed facility to replace 60% of our current facility. And so the technology that we put in now, we will just transfer into the new facility. We did have the opportunity of sending one of our board members along to the technology conference just before COVID hit. And he came back and really encouraged the board to continue on with our project. And our project will be very much dependent on whether we gain finance from the government's financial viability grant. So there's $50 million up for grabs. It's been expended out until April next year, and we're hoping that they might see that by introducing robots into Tanunda Lutheran Home is going to save us about $180,000 a year. And to me, that will make a huge difference to our bottom line. If I have to actually pay for the robots, I would then have to wait sort of the 3 to 4 years to get return on investment. So the board are very excited about the fact that, one, we've got the opportunity to go for the grant. They can certainly see the benefits of reducing work health and safety issues. It will put Tanunda Lutheran Home on a bit of a map, I suppose, because if we were to be lucky enough to get the grant and go ahead almost immediately, we may end up being the first one in South Australia to have robots. And to me, that would be a good tick in the box for Tanunda Lutheran Home, the Barossa Valley as a whole. It gives people reasons to come and spend time in the Barossa Valley. So I encourage you to encourage them to give me the money. Look, it's all about financial viability. It is not easy running an aged care standalone facility in the rural area, and the board are aware of that. So they're encouraging me to do whatever it takes to meet the future requirements. So my idea for the future is that we use one of these robots to set up a little daisy train, because one of the biggest issues is that we use volunteers to move our residents around. Without volunteers, that means I've got to use a paid staff member, which means a greater reduction in, real resident staff member time. So I'd like to see a little daisy chain with a robot in front picking up residents and dropping them off at the hairdresser or dropping them off into the dining rooms and so forth, because a lot of our residents are becoming less and less able to mobilise easily. I have part of my facility where I've got a 15-degree ramp, and most of my residents can't get up that ramp to the dining room without assistance currently from staff. And all my trolleys are currently motorised to get the trolleys up the thing. So getting the robots is an absolute positive for us.
Okay, thanks for that, Lee. And that's a really interesting point, because you're almost touching on that point where it's almost mobility on demand, or mobility as a utility in a facility. Sue, let's move on to you at the moment. So you've got the final say on robotics for today's session. I guess from where you sit as a roboticist, and when you look at aged care, and you know, what are some potential exciting opportunities and applications that you might see in our sector for robots?
Well, I think as robots get more competent, you're going to see them moving more out of the back of the house to help with some front of the house work. You know, in particular, they might be very useful to help with some medical diagnostics to alert staff when there may be a problem with a resident. And that can be done by various different sensing techniques. But, you know, we are moving now into the area where, thanks to a lot of advances in computer vision, robots are increasingly able to do things like recognize emotion as well. So one, you might be able to use them increasingly due to COVID-19. We're seeing the use of heat sensors in a lot of areas, which is obviously something that robots can transport, and be taking people's temperatures as well. But I think that in addition to be able to check some of the basic, you know, vital statistics for residents, you'll probably see robots perhaps taking a bit more of an interest in their mental health as well, and what cues they can pick up on to help staff to, you know, check which residents might need a little bit of an extra hand. And I think the COVID situation has really, in some respects, made things easier for robots to be deployed, in as much as now that people have a much stronger focus on reducing the number of, you know, places where our fingers touch. You know, there's much more emphasis on having self-opening and closing doors. Well, that's just fantastic for robots, because one of the greatest challenges still for robots is opening a door, you know, something so simple for a human. So I think that this will really see a time where we'll see a lot more application of robots. And, you know, UV disinfectant robots, as Leonie has described, have actually been in existence for some time, but we weren't seeing a lot of uptake of those technologies because, well, I think, you know, initially they're quite expensive, and if you're not selling a high volume of them, then they tend to be expensive. But there is now a very clear use case, because if you want to make sure that you're not putting your cleaning staff in a risky situation by making them do manually clean an area where you could just deploy a robot, then I think the use case, you know, becomes much clearer. And so I think it's more likely that you'll see robots being used. But I'm not sure that I can imagine all of the best uses, because, and I think Leonie previewed this, you know, one thing that we do see when robots are deployed in either an aged care facility or somewhere like a hospital is that staff themselves often come up with the best ideas about how those robots can be deployed. And then really just feeding that information back to the, you know, the companies building the robots is important. Because I think often it is the staff who have the best sense of how these tools can be used to augment what they already do. You know, I think that, you know, probably everyone who has had an experience with robot deployment knows that, you know, often staff can be very concerned, and residents may have some concerns about, you know, a robot coming into their environment, but it doesn't take very long after exposure to a robot to actually get a sense of what their capabilities are, and importantly, what they're not. And most people are probably a bit surprised to discover, you know, that they are very limited. But that doesn't mean that they're not useful, and that they can do some really handy things. And I think we haven't even begun to explore some of the things that we could be applying robots to do. But I think in particular at the moment, a fantastic purpose that they can serve is in just helping as much as possible to you know, take people out of some of the situations where they might be at more risk of contracting something like a virus than in the past.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for that. So I'm going to bring us to a close today. Thank you very much, Sue, Leonie, Olaf, John, and Lee. I think that the takeaway that I have with what you say there, Sue, and I think it's quite positive and quite hopeful because it hits on these sort of grand challenges for robotics, is that you're talking about better semantics, robotic semantics, and you're talking about better robotic interactions or human robotic interactions. And I think that's a really positive note to end today on. So thank you very much. And to all of you who've hung on this long, you know, that brings our session to a close today. And thank you very much for joining us. I will be back, no pun intended. I will be back next Wednesday to talk with Joseph McCarthy from NovaCare and Vinny D'Alessandro from Umbrella Solutions about modern governance using technology to take control of the aged care quality standards. So once again, thank you for joining us today. See you next week. Bye-bye. Anyway, I'll see you.
Yeah.